Have you ever felt like your pet knows something you don't? What if I told you that a cat saved a baby from a hidden danger no one else could see? This is the story of Oliver, a majestic Persian cat adopted by Sarah and Michael before their daughter Emily was born. Everything seemed perfect until Oliver started acting strangely. Sleepless nights, staring at the window, obsessively guarding the crib. Something was wrong, but no one knew what. What seemed like odd cat behavior hid a chilling secret, and when the truth was revealed, it was terrifying. What did Oliver know that his owners didn't? What did the cameras capture that made this family flee their own home? Stay until the end to uncover this real and emotional story, and comment below. Where are you watching from? Oh, and don't forget to leave a like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss more incredible stories. Now, get ready, because this story will leave you speechless. Let's dive in. The first snow of December dusted the sidewalks of Manhattan as Sarah and Michael Parker stepped out of the animal shelter, carefully cradling a soft, golden bundle in their arms. The little creature nestled in Sarah's coat was Oliver, a strikingly beautiful Persian cat with a thick, luxurious orange coat and large, intelligent amber eyes that gleamed in the dim streetlights. Despite the cold, his purring was a warm vibration against Sarah's chest, a comforting sound amid the excitement of bringing him home. Sarah, a 32-year-old pediatric nurse, had been longing for a pet ever since she and Michael moved into their Upper West Side apartment. She had grown up with cats in her childhood home in Connecticut, and the absence of one in their lives felt like an empty space waiting to be filled. Michael, a 34-year-old architect, was initially hesitant about the idea of owning a pet, but the moment he saw Oliver at the shelter, something in him softened. Maybe it was the way the cat had gazed up at him with an almost knowing expression, or maybe it was the way he immediately curled into Sarah's lap as if he belonged there. "Are you sure about this, babe?" Michael asked as they walked home, his arm around Sarah's shoulder to shield her from the icy wind. Sarah chuckled, tilting her head toward the small, warm bundle. "Look at him, Mike. He already loves us. How could I say no to this little guy?" Michael sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. All right, but you're on litter box duty for the first month." Sarah nudged him playfully. "We'll see about that." Their apartment was a cozy two-bedroom space on the 5th floor of a brownstone, decorated with warm-toned furniture, stacks of books, and a large bay window that overlooked Riverside Park. It was the kind of place that invited late-night conversations over tea and the soft hum of jazz playing from their old record player. As soon as they stepped inside, Oliver leaped from Sarah's arms and began exploring his new home with the confidence of a king surveying his kingdom. He padded across the wooden floors, sniffed the corners of the couch, and finally jumped onto the windowsill, where he sat, tail curled around his paws, staring at the outside world as if he had always lived there. "You think he likes it?" Michael asked, watching the cat with a smirk. Sarah smiled. "I think he loves it." Oliver adjusted quickly to his new home. He was affectionate but independent, often weaving between their legs or curling up on their laps when they watched movies on the couch. At night, he would jump onto the foot of their bed and sleep peacefully, his soft purring blending into the quiet of their apartment. Everything felt perfect, almost too perfect. 2 months later, as the first signs of spring whispered through the city, Sarah found out she was pregnant. The news was both thrilling and terrifying. They had always wanted a family, but now that it was real, the responsibility weighed heavily on them. Would they be good parents? Would they be ready? Michael held Sarah in his arms that evening, pressing a gentle kiss to her forehead. "We're in this together, okay?" Sarah nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "Okay." From the moment Sarah's pregnancy progressed, Oliver became even more attached to her. He followed her around the apartment, rubbing against her legs as if to remind her that he was there. He would press his warm body against her belly when she lay on the couch, purring deeply, as if he could sense the life growing inside her. "Maybe he knows," Sarah whispered one night, absent-mindedly stroking Oliver's fur as he lay curled against her stomach. Michael chuckled. "Knows what?" that there's someone new coming into our lives. Michael smirked. You think our cat has psychic abilities now? Sarah laughed, nudging him with her elbow. I think he's just connected to us in a way I can't explain. Michael shrugged. Well, as long as he doesn't start talking, I think we're good. The months passed, and Oliver remained a constant presence. He was there when Sarah decorated the nursery, when Michael assembled the crib, and when they sat on the floor picking out baby names. He watched it all with those sharp, amber eyes, as if he were silently preparing himself for the arrival of the new family member. Then, on a cold November morning, Emily was born. The first time Sarah and Michael brought her home from the hospital, Oliver was waiting by the door, tail flicking with curiosity. Sarah carefully lowered the car seat to the floor, watching as Oliver approached cautiously. He sniffed the tiny bundle, ears perked, eyes wide. Easy, buddy, Michael murmured, watching closely. Oliver took another sniff, then let out a slow, deep purr before curling up beside the car seat, his tail wrapping protectively around himself. Sarah exhaled, a wave of relief washing over her. I think he approves. Michael smiled, wrapping an arm around her. Good, because he's officially a big brother now. Little did they know, Oliver's role in their family was about to become more than just that of a loving pet. He was about to prove that he was far more than a cat. He was a guardian. The first few weeks after Emily's arrival were a blur of sleepless nights, diaper changes, and the quiet hum of lullabies played from a small speaker in the nursery. Sarah and Michael were adjusting to their new lives as parents, exhausted but deeply in love with their tiny daughter. And through it all, Oliver remained a constant presence. At first, it was endearing. The cat, who had always been affectionate but independent, had suddenly decided that Emily was his responsibility. Every night, as soon as Sarah placed Emily in her crib, Oliver would jump onto the small armchair in the corner of the nursery and settle in as if he were standing guard. Look at him, Sarah whispered one night as she and Michael stood in the doorway of the nursery, watching their daughter sleep. He's like a little sentry. Michael chuckled. I guess we don't need a baby monitor. We've got Oliver. But as the days passed, what had seemed sweet and innocent started to feel different. Oliver stopped leaving the nursery at night. No matter how much Sarah coaxed him or tried to carry him out, he always found his way back, curling up near the crib with a watchful expression. And it wasn't just that he stayed, it was how he stayed. He doesn't even sleep, Sarah murmured one night, watching as Oliver sat upright on the carpet, his ears perked, his gaze fixed on the crib. It's like he's waiting for something. Michael, half asleep, rubbed his face. He's a cat, babe. He's just being weird. You know how cats get. But Sarah wasn't so sure. She started to notice other things. During the day, Oliver was the same as always, curious, affectionate, content to lounge on the couch or stretch out in sunbeams. But at night, something changed. His body would stiffen, his tail would twitch, and his ears would rotate toward the window, as if he were listening to something no one else could hear. And then there was the way he reacted to Emily. One night, as Sarah rocked Emily in her arms, Oliver suddenly jumped onto the changing table, his fur standing on end. He let out a deep, guttural growl, a sound Sarah had never heard from him before. Oliver, she said softly, startled by the sound. The cat's amber eyes locked onto something behind her. Sarah's heart pounded as she turned, but there was nothing there. Just the rocking chair, the shelves of children's books, and the closed window. Sarah? Michael's voice was groggy from the bedroom. Everything okay? Sarah forced herself to breathe, stroking Oliver's fur in an attempt to calm him. His body was tense beneath her hand, his ears pinned back. Yeah, she called back, though she wasn't sure if she believed it. The next night, it happened again. Emily had just been put down in her crib, her tiny fists curled against her cheeks. Oliver was in his usual spot, lying next to the crib, his tail flicking in slow, deliberate movements. Then, at exactly 2:13 a.m., he lifted his head abruptly. His ears twitched, his fur bristled, and his tail went completely still. Sarah, who had woken up to check on Emily, froze in the doorway. "Oliver," she whispered. The cat didn't move. His eyes were locked on the window, the dim glow of the street lamp casting long shadows across the room. Sarah followed his gaze, her skin prickling with unease. Outside, the backyard was empty. Just the fence, the alley, the distant glow of other apartment buildings. "Come on, buddy," she murmured, reaching down to scoop him up. But the moment she touched him, Oliver let out a sharp, warning hiss. Sarah gasped, pulling her hand back. Oliver had never hissed at her before. "What the hell?" she whispered, her pulse quickening. The cat didn't relax. He just sat there, rigid, staring at the window as if something, or someone, was standing on the other side. Sarah's breath came in shallow bursts. She glanced at Emily, then at the baby monitor, as if it might somehow give her an answer. There was nothing, just silence. And yet, as Sarah backed out of the room, Oliver remained, his unblinking eyes still fixated on the darkness beyond the glass. Something was wrong. She just didn't know what yet. The next morning, Sarah sat at the kitchen table, cradling a cup of coffee in her hands. The rich aroma filled the apartment, but she barely noticed. Her mind was elsewhere. Across from her, Michael was flipping through his phone, still in his sweatpants and an old college t-shirt, his hair messy from sleep. He hadn't noticed the way Sarah kept glancing toward the nursery, hadn't seen the way her fingers tapped anxiously against the ceramic mug. "Mike," she finally said, her voice quieter than usual. "Emim?" He didn't look up. Something's wrong with Oliver. That got his attention. He placed his phone down and looked at her, eyebrows furrowing. "What do you mean?" Sarah exhaled, trying to gather her thoughts. "I mean, he's not acting like himself. He won't leave Emily's side, not even for food. And last night," she hesitated, not sure how to explain it without sounding paranoid. Michael frowned. "What happened last night?" Sarah licked her lips. "He hissed at me." Michael blinked. "Oliver?" "He's never hissed at you." "Exactly," she said, leaning forward. "And it wasn't just a random thing. He was staring at the window in Emily's room, completely frozen. I tried to pick him up, and he hissed like I was stopping him from protecting her." Michael leaned back in his chair, rubbing his jaw. "Babe, he's probably just being territorial. New baby in the house, new sense. Maybe he's just being overprotective." Sarah shook her head. "No, this isn't normal," Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Okay, let's say Oliver is acting weird. What do you think it means?" Sarah hesitated before answering. I think he's sensing something. Something we don't see." Michael gave her a skeptical look. "Sarah, I know it sounds crazy," she interrupted, frustration creeping into her tone. "But cats pick up on things. They have instincts. Maybe there's something outside, an animal or—" She swallowed hard, lowering her voice. "Or someone." That made Michael pause. He glanced toward the nursery, his jaw tightening. "You think someone's been outside Emily's window?" Sarah nodded slowly. "I don't know for sure, but Oliver does. And I trust him." Michael sighed, rubbing his temples. "All right, I'll check the locks in the backyard when I get home from work tonight. But let's not jump to conclusions, okay? Maybe he's just being a weird cat." Sarah wanted to believe that. She really did. But deep down, something told her this wasn't just Oliver being weird. This was Oliver trying to warn them. That night, Michael followed through on his word. He checked every window lock, inspected the backyard, and even made sure the alley behind their building was empty before coming back inside. Everything seemed normal. "You see," he said as he locked the back door. "Nothing's out there." Sarah wasn't convinced. She stood at the window in the nursery, looking out into the quiet night. The street lamp flickered, casting long shadows against the fence. Oliver was in his usual spot by the crib, staring intently at the window. His tail twitched, but he made no move to relax. Sarah bit her lip. Then why does he still look so tense? Michael rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't know, babe. Maybe he just—" A loud thud came from outside. Sarah gasped, and Michael's head snapped toward the window. Oliver shot up, his ears flattened against his head, his fur bristling. A deep growl rumbled from his chest. Michael moved fast. He grabbed the baseball bat he kept in the closet and stormed toward the back door, flipping the outside light on. The harsh glow illuminated the backyard, the fence, the narrow alley. Nothing. Michael exhaled sharply, lowering the bat. "Damn raccoons," he muttered. Sarah wasn't so sure. She stared out the nursery window, scanning the backyard. The cold night air pressed against the glass. The alley looked empty, but something felt wrong. Her heart pounded as she spotted something on the ground near the fence. A cigarette butt, still burning. Someone had been standing there, watching. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Michael, who was still outside, oblivious. Oliver let out a sharp, urgent meow. Sarah whispered under her breath, "Oh my God, this wasn't just paranoia. Someone was out there, and they weren't alone." The discovery of the still-burning cigarette but left Sarah rattled. The reality of it gnawed at her nerves long after Michael dismissed it as some random guy passing through. People walk by the alley all the time. He had reasoned as he crawled into bed that night. Doesn't mean they were looking at our window. But Sarah wasn't convinced. Oliver's behavior, the strange noises, the heavy feeling of being watched. It all added up to something she couldn't ignore. That night, as the apartment settled into its usual quiet, Sarah lay awake staring at the ceiling. She could hear the rhythmic breathing of Michael beside her, the faint hum of the heater, the occasional creak of the old floorboards. But something felt off. She turned toward the baby monitor on her nightstand, watching the grainy black and white feed of Emily's crib. Oliver was there, as always, curled up near the crib with his body tense and his amber eyes alert. Sarah sighed and rubbed her temples. Maybe she was just exhausted. Maybe all of this, Oliver's fixation, her own anxiety, was just the paranoia of a new mother. But then she heard it. A faint tap against the window. Her stomach clenched. Sarah bolted upright, straining to listen. The apartment was silent. Too silent. Sliding out of bed as quietly as she could, she tiptoed to the nursery. The dim glow of the nightlight cast long shadows along the walls, stretching eerily across the crib, the rocking chair, the dresser. Oliver was sitting stiffly now, his back arched, his ears flat. His gaze was locked on the window. Sarah felt the hairs on the back of her neck stand up. Slowly, she stepped closer, her breath coming out in shaky exhales. The window was closed. The curtains barely moved. There was no wind outside. So what the hell had made that sound? She swallowed hard, gripping the edge of the crib. Oliver let out a low, guttural growl. Sarah's pulse hammered in her ears. The baby monitor on the dresser suddenly let out a sharp burst of static. Sarah nearly jumped out of her skin. She grabbed the monitor, adjusting the volume, trying to steady her shaking hands. That's when she heard it. A sound so faint, so delicate, that at first she thought she imagined it. A whisper, a breathy, drawn-out sound, like someone exhaling right next to the microphone. Sarah's heart nearly stopped. Her grip tightened on the monitor. She turned toward the window, her body screaming at her to run, to wake Michael, to grab Emily and get the hell out. Then, another tap. This time, she saw it. A shadow moved outside the window. Sarah sprinted out of the nursery. "Michael!" she gasped, shoving him awake. He bolted upright, eyes wild. What is it?" Sarah was trembling. "Someone's outside Emily's window." Michael didn't hesitate. He jumped out of bed, grabbed the bat from the closet, and stormed toward the nursery. Sarah followed, her pulse a chaotic drumbeat in her ears. But when they got there, nothing. The backyard was still. The alley was empty. The only sign that someone had been there was the faint outline of a handprint smudged against the bottom corner of the glass. Sarah felt her legs go weak. Michael cursed under his breath. "Okay," he said, running a hand through his hair. "I'll call the police." Sarah clutched Emily to her chest, her heart racing. Oliver sat at the foot of the crib, his tail flicking anxiously, his amber eyes still locked on the window. He knew. He had known all along. And whoever had been out there, they weren't finished yet. The tension in the apartment was suffocating. Even after the police had come and gone, after checking the backyard and finding nothing, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Michael had spoken to the officers, explaining what happened. The noises, the cigarette butt, the handprint on the window. But without any concrete evidence or a clear suspect, there wasn't much they could do. "We'll increase patrols around the neighborhood," one of the officers had said. "Keep your doors and windows locked. If anything else happens, call us immediately." It wasn't enough. That night, Sarah couldn't sleep. She lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, her fingers gripping the blanket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Michael was asleep beside her, his breath steady and even. Emily was safe in her crib, her baby monitor casting a soft glow on the nightstand. And Oliver was watching the window. From the moment the police left, he hadn't moved from his spot. He sat perfectly still near the nursery's bay window, his body rigid, his tail curled neatly around his paws. Sarah knew cats could be weird. She had read about their strange quirks, the way they stared at walls for no reason, the way they suddenly sprinted out of rooms as if something unseen was chasing them. But this wasn't that. Oliver wasn't staring at nothing. He was staring at something, and that scared her more than anything. 1:48 a.m., Sarah jolted awake to the sound of scraping. She wasn't sure how long she had been asleep, but the second the noise registered, she was alert. Her body went cold, her pulse pounding in her throat. It was coming from Emily's room. Michael was still asleep. She shook his arm roughly. "Mike," she whispered, her voice tight with fear. "Do you hear that?" Michael groaned, rubbing his eyes. "Hear what?" "Scrapey." Michael froze. That was enough. He was out of bed in an instant, grabbing the bat once again. Sarah followed closely behind, every muscle in her body tense. They reached the nursery door, and Sarah felt her breath catch. Oliver was still by the window, but now he was crouched low, his ears flattened against his head, his body trembling with tension. His eyes were wide, pupils blown so large that only thin slivers of amber remained. His fur stood on end, his back arched like a Halloween decoration, and the growl that rumbled from his throat was like nothing Sarah had ever heard before. Low, deep, dangerous. "Jesus," Michael whispered. "What the hell is he looking at?" Sarah didn't answer. She couldn't, because the moment she stepped closer, the scraping came again. From outside the window, Sarah's blood ran cold. Michael reacted first. He stormed forward, yanked the curtains open. Nothing. Just darkness. The faint glow of the street lamp. The empty alley. No footprints. No sign of movement. Just stillness. And yet, Oliver did not relax. His growl only deepened. His claws dug into the wooden floor. And Sarah knew. She knew, deep in her bones, that something had been there. Something had been watching. And it would be back. The next morning, the air inside the apartment felt different. Heavy, like a storm was looming just beyond the windows. Sarah hadn't slept. Even after Michael checked the backyard again, even after he reassured her that everything was fine, she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't fine. Neither could Oliver. The cat hadn't left his spot by the window. His usual playful energy was gone. He barely ate, barely moved, just sat there, waiting. Sarah couldn't ignore it anymore. "We need cameras," she said over breakfast, her voice firm. Michael looked up from his coffee, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. "Cameras?" "Yes," she said, pushing her plate aside. "For the nursery, for the backyard. I want to see what's out there, Mike." Michael sighed, setting his cup down. "Sarah, She cut him off. "Don't tell me it's nothing. You heard it last night. You saw Oliver." Michael exhaled slowly, dragging a hand down his face. "I just don't know if cameras are gonna." "Please." That one word made him stop. Sarah wasn't just anxious, she was terrified. He could see it in the way she gripped the edge of the table, the way her eyes darted toward the nursery as if something was still there. Michael sighed. "All right, I'll pick some up after work." Sarah let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. By that evening, Michael had installed 3 cameras, one inside Emily's nursery, angled toward the crib and window, and 2 outside, covering the backyard and alley. Sarah sat on the couch, her laptop open, watching the live feeds. The nursery cam showed Emily sleeping peacefully, a soft glow from her nightlight casting gentle shadows across the walls. Oliver was there, of course, curled up beside the crib, still watching. She glanced at the backyard feed. The alley was empty. For now. 2:11 a.m. The baby monitor crackled. Sarah's eyes snapped open. She turned to look at the screen on her nightstand, her stomach tightening. The nursery feed was still live. Emily was there. Oliver was there. But Oliver was standing now. Not just standing, rigid. His ears were flat, his fur bristling, his tail twitching violently, and his eyes locked on the window. Sarah's heart pounded as she grabbed her laptop, quickly switching to the backyard feed. She sucked in a sharp breath. A figure, standing just beyond the fence, in the shadows. Motionless. Watching. Sarah's hand flew to Michael's arm, shaking him awake. Mike. What? He groggily sat up, then froze when he saw the screen. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, the figure moved. A slow, deliberate step toward the window. Sarah's breath caught. Oh my God. Michael was already moving, throwing off the blankets, grabbing his phone. I'm calling the cops. Sarah's hands trembled as she watched the screen. Oliver's body was tense, his gaze locked onto the window. His tail lashed, his mouth opening slightly, letting out a silent, eerie hiss. Then, the nursery camera glitched. For a split second, the screen went black. Sarah gasped, hitting refresh. No. The feed came back. The figure was gone. But the handprint was back, pressed against the glass. The moment Michael hung up with the police, he was already reaching for his jacket. I'm going outside, he said, voice tight. Sarah grabbed his arm. Mike, no, wait for the cops. But he was already at the door, flipping the deadbolt. I'm not waiting. If someone's been creeping around our daughter's window, I want to see where the hell they went. Sarah's heart was pounding as she followed him to the back door. The cold night air rushed in as he stepped out onto the patio, the dim porch light barely cutting through the darkness. Oliver slipped out behind them, his body low, his fur still bristling. Michael's grip tightened around the baseball bat as he scanned the alley. If someone's out here, you better get the hell off my property, he called, his voice sharp. Silence. Sarah's breath came in short, shallow bursts. She clutched her phone in her shaking hands, the live feed from the backyard camera still up on her screen. There had been someone there, and now they were gone. Michael stepped further out, eyes darting to the fence. That's when Sarah saw it. His body tensed. What? She whispered. Michael didn't answer. He bent down slowly, reaching towards something on the ground near the fence. Sarah took a shaky step forward, her stomach twisting as she followed his gaze. A stuffed animal. A small, pink bunny, dirt-streaked and damp from the grass. It was Emily's. Sarah's blood ran cold. She whipped her head toward the nursery window, staring at the fresh handprint still smeared against the glass. Someone had been close enough to touch it, close enough to reach into the crib. Her body trembled. Michael, how did this get out here? Michael's jaw was clenched, his knuckles white around the bat. I don't know. His voice was dangerously calm. Sarah felt a sharp prickle of fear race down her spine. That toy had been inside Emily's crib when she put her to bed. Someone had been inside their house. The police arrived within minutes. 2 officers combed the backyard, scanning the alley for footprints, checking the fence for signs of forced entry. The lead officer, a man in his 40s with tired eyes and a no-nonsense tone, looked at Michael as he took notes. You're saying this toy was inside your daughter's crib before tonight? Michael nodded stiffly. My wife put her to bed herself. The officer glanced toward the fence, then back at Sarah. Any doors unlocked? Windows open? No, Sarah whispered, arms wrapped around herself. I check them every night. Everything was locked. The officer's expression darkened. Then someone had access to your house. Sarah swallowed, her hands shaking. There was a handprint on the window, she murmured. It wasn't there before. One of the other officers walked up, shaking his head. No signs of forced entry. No footprints leading away from the house. Whoever it was, they knew what they were doing. Michael let out a slow, heavy breath. So what now? You just leave and hope this guy doesn't come back? The lead officer shut his notepad. "We'll increase patrols. I suggest you install additional security, alarm system, reinforced locks. If anything else happens, call us immediately." Sarah's heart sank. That was it? That was all they could do? She stared at the stuffed bunny in the officer's gloved hands, bile rising in her throat. Someone had taken it from inside their house, and that meant they were already inside once. Nothing was stopping them from coming back. That night, Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking as she clutched a steaming cup of tea. She hadn't stopped shaking since the cops left. Michael paced the room, his body rigid with frustration. "I should have checked the house sooner. Should have put up cameras weeks ago." Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. "What if they come back?" Michael turned to her, his eyes dark. "They won't." But she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. Sarah glanced toward the baby monitor. Emily was fast asleep in her crib, and next to her, Oliver, still watching, still waiting. Sarah swallowed hard. She had a terrible feeling. This wasn't over. Not yet. The apartment felt different. Unsafe. Violated. Even with the new locks Michael installed the next morning, even after reinforcing the windows, Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing unease in her stomach. Every creak of the old floorboards made her jump. Every shadow cast by the streetlight outside made her heart pound. Someone had been inside their home. Someone had stood over Emily's crib, and that someone was still out there. That night, Sarah sat in the nursery, rocking Emily in her arms. The baby's warm body was curled against her chest, her tiny fingers wrapped around the fabric of Sarah's sweater. The soft scent of baby powder and fresh laundry filled the room, but even that wasn't enough to ease Sarah's nerves. Oliver sat on the floor near the crib, his amber eyes locked on the window. He hadn't left Emily's side since the police had come. He knew. Sarah glanced down at him. "What is it, buddy?" she whispered. Oliver flicked his tail once, but didn't move. Sarah's throat felt tight. She wished she could see what he saw. After a few more minutes, Emily let out a tiny sigh, her body going slack as sleep took over. Carefully, Sarah stood, lowering her into the crib. She brushed a hand over her daughter's soft curls, whispering, "Mommy's here. You're safe." She wasn't sure if she believed it. Later that night, Oliver's growling woke them up. Sarah sat up instantly, her pulse racing. Beside her, Michael jolted awake, already reaching for the baseball bat. Then they heard it, the doorknob rattling. Sarah's blood ran cold. Michael jumped out of bed, moving fast toward the hallway. Sarah grabbed his wrist. "Mike, no." But he was already there, flipping on the hallway light, yanking the bedroom door open. The nursery door was slightly ajar, and Oliver was in the doorway, his body low, his tail puffed, his ears flat. His growl deepened as he stared into the dim hallway. Michael moved forward cautiously, his grip tightening on the bat. Sarah stood frozen behind him, her heart slamming against her ribs. The front door was still locked. The windows were shut, but someone had been in the hallway. Sarah's stomach twisted. "Check the cameras." Michael ran back to the bedroom, grabbing his phone. He pulled up the security footage, tapping quickly through the feeds. And then there, a dark figure stood at the end of the hallway, inside the apartment, just beyond the nursery door. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. The figure didn't move, didn't flinch. And then, just before the feed glitched, just before the screen cut to static, the figure did something that made Sarah's blood freeze. They turned their head toward the camera and smiled. The feed went black. Sarah's voice broke. "Oh my God," Michael cursed, his fingers shaking as he tried to refresh the screen. The feed flickered back on. The hallway was empty. Oliver let out a final, deep growl, then relaxed. His fur settled, his tail uncurled. He let out a slow breath and curled up near the crib. Sarah swallowed hard. Oliver had known. He had sensed the danger before they did. And somehow, whoever had been in their apartment was gone. Michael was already dialing the police. "They were inside," he said, his voice shaking with rage. "Inside our goddamn house." Sarah couldn't breathe. Emily stirred softly in her crib, oblivious to the terror unfolding around her. Sarah stepped into the nursery and sank to her knees beside Oliver, pressing her forehead against his soft fur. "Thank you," she whispered. He let out a deep purr, but his eyes never left the window, as if he knew. It wasn't over yet. Michael's hands trembled as he held his phone to his ear, his voice tight with rage. "We have an intruder." They were inside our home. Sarah sat frozen on the nursery floor, arms wrapped around herself, her breath coming in short, panicked bursts. She felt like she was drowning in fear. Oliver, still crouched near Emily's crib, hadn't moved. His tail flicked, his ears were alert, but he was no longer growling. Whatever had been there, it was gone now. But for how long? Michael paced as he spoke to the dispatcher. Yes, the locks were all in place. No signs of forced entry. But our security camera caught someone. In our hallway, Sarah swallowed hard. That image, the figure standing just beyond Emily's door, staring at the camera, smiling, was burned into her mind. Michael's voice sharpened. "No, we're not imagining things. Check the damn footage yourself." Sarah flinched at the anger in his tone. Michael was always the rational one, the one who stayed calm under pressure. But now? Now, he was terrified too. The dispatcher assured them that an officer would be there soon. Michael hung up, his jaw clenched. "They're sending someone over," he muttered. "But what the hell are they gonna do? They keep showing up after it's too late." Sarah forced herself to breathe. "Mike, what if they left something? Some kind of proof?" Michael's gaze snapped to hers. Without another word, he marched toward the hallway. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Emily before following. The air in the apartment felt wrong. Thick, heavy, like something had just been there. Michael checked the front door. Locked. The windows? Locked. The balcony? Nothing. Then Sarah gasped. There was something on the floor. A piece of paper, right in front of the nursery door. Michael bent down slowly, his breath shallow as he picked it up. It was an old Polaroid photo. The edges were worn, yellowed with age. Sarah stepped closer, peering over his shoulder. The picture showed a baby's crib, just like Emily's, and standing beside it, a man. His face was blurred, distorted as if something had smeared the image. But there was something wrong about his posture, something unnatural about the way he leaned toward the crib. Sarah felt her stomach twist violently. "This isn't ours," she whispered. Michael turned the photo over. There was something written in faded ink. "She looks just like her." Sarah's breath hitched. She yanked the photo from Michael's hands, her vision swimming. "What the hell does that mean?" Michael took a slow, shaky breath. "It means whoever was here. They've been watching for a long time." A chill ran down Sarah's spine. Oliver let out a sharp, warning growl from the nursery. Michael turned, gripping the bat tighter. "We're leaving," he said, his voice like steel. "Now." Sarah didn't argue. She scooped Emily into her arms, pressing a kiss to her soft curls. Her hands trembled, her heartbeat a deafening drum in her ears. This wasn't just an intruder. This was something else. Someone who had been watching them, studying them, waiting for something. And Sarah knew they weren't safe here anymore. Sarah held Emily tightly against her chest as Michael shoved clothes, documents, and essential items into a duffel bag. There was no discussion, no hesitation. They were leaving. "I'll book us a hotel," Michael muttered, his phone already in hand. His voice was clipped, his movements sharp. He wasn't taking chances anymore. Sarah, still gripping the haunting Polaroid, stared at it with growing unease. "She looks just like her." The words echoed in her skull, making her stomach churn. Who was her? Who had left this photograph? Who had been in their home? Sarah glanced at Oliver, still planted beside the crib. His eyes were locked on the door, his body alert. He knew. He had known from the beginning. The police arrived 20 minutes later, but by then, Sarah and Michael were already packed, their car idling in the dim glow of the streetlights. An officer examined the photo, his expression darkening. "Where did you find this?" Michael pointed to the hallway. "Right outside my daughter's room." The officer's jaw tightened. He exchanged a look with his partner, then flipped the Polaroid back over. "Did you recognize the man in the picture?" he asked. Sarah shook her head quickly. "No, the face is blurred. But the crib, it looks just like Emily's." The officer exhaled, glancing toward the nursery. We need to take this in for analysis. But if someone's been inside your house without forced entry, they either had a key or they've been in before. Sarah's breath caught. We changed the locks before we moved in. The officer hesitated, then asked, "Did the previous owner leave anything behind?" Michael frowned. "No, we bought the place from an older couple. It was completely cleaned out." The officer turned the Polaroid over again, studying the faded ink. His next words made Sarah's skin go ice cold. "This handwriting, it's old. Decades old." Sarah's stomach dropped. "What?" Michael whispered. The officer nodded, his face grim. "The ink is faded, but the way the letters curve. This wasn't written recently." Sarah's hands began to shake. How could an old photograph just appear out of nowhere? How could it have been left for them? Inside a locked house? Michael's voice was tight. "Are you saying whoever did this has been around for years?" The officer didn't answer immediately. He looked around the apartment as if sensing something unseen. Finally, he said, "We'll look into it. But if I were you, I wouldn't stay here tonight." Michael didn't need to be told twice. "We're already gone." 2:30 a.m. They checked into a small hotel on the other side of the city. The room was quiet, dimly lit, the heavy curtains blocking out the streetlights. Sarah sat on the edge of the bed, cradling Emily, brushing her tiny fingers against her lips. Her heartbeat was finally starting to slow. Oliver had followed them without protest, curling up near Sarah's feet, his watchful eyes never leaving the door. Michael sat beside her, rubbing a hand over his face. "Tomorrow, we call a realtor," he said. "We're selling the apartment. I don't care how much money we lose." Sarah nodded, her throat too tight to speak. She looked at Emily, then at Oliver. Her family was safe, and in the end, that was all that mattered. She reached down, running her fingers through Oliver's soft fur. He let out a low purr, pressing his head against her palm. "Thank you," she whispered. He blinked up at her with knowing eyes, as if he was saying, "You were never alone," as if he had always known, as if he had been there to protect them all along. And maybe, just maybe, he always would. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, activate the notification bell, and if you watched until now, comment, "I watched until here," and share your opinion about this story. Oh, and don't forget to watch the next video that appears on the end screen. It's really exciting.